Without further ado, let me introduce our very first session. So, Emma, you can make your way up here. Emma Bostock is presenting on the Transcendence of Gender, a Thomist critique of second-wave feminism. Welcome, Emma.
My name's Emma, and just as we begin, I wanted to say that the following presentation is an overview of my master's dissertation. The abstract reads, "This paper critiques second-wave feminism represented by Simone de Beauvoir through a retrieval of the Thomistic understanding of beauty as a transcendental. By comparing the different meanings of transcendence for de Beauvoir and Thomas Aquinas, this paper will highlight the need for a supernatural account of gender." Okay. So, British philosopher Roger Scruton points out that the existence of beauty is undeniable for any human being. It is an unavoidable experience of reality that impacts individuals and demands a response. But a problem arises when we try to understand where this source of beauty belongs. Is beauty located in the eye of the beholder, or is it a transcendental, something concrete that lies beyond personal experience but is present in every experience? Up until the Enlightenment, beauty was understood to be primarily an objective quality. But at the time of Immanuel Kant, the relationship between beauty and pleasure had changed somewhat from the classical view. It was the pain or pleasure evoked by a thing that determined the beauty of that thing, thus making beauty depend fundamentally on subjectivity. A judgment of beauty, therefore, was based on an individual's experience. One individual may find something beautiful that would mean very little to anyone else. For example, the design of a house may remind someone of their fond memories of their family home. The result of this was that beauty lost its value and ability to communicate universally. By the beginning of the 20th century, the philosophical interest in beauty had declined and was deemed an unfashionable concern. However, and perhaps surprisingly, a revival of interest in beauty occurred around the 1980s with feminist philosophy. Assuming the subjectivist view of beauty, the feminists were reacting against the objectification of women and the inevitable exploitation that comes with it, which was held to be the result of pleasure-seeking males. Feminists saw beauty merely as a set of essentially subjective rules intended to control the image of woman, removing female autonomy. Hence, if the gender hierarchy was to be reformed, it would require deeply reconstruing the concept of beauty. This essay takes up this challenge, but it does so by using retrieval of the classical view of beauty, exemplified by Thomas Aquinas, in order to critique the influential view of gender in second-wave feminism, as exemplified by de Beauvoir. So we begin with de Beauvoir. In 1949, de Beauvoir published The Second Sex. This classic feminist text looked to remove the persistent inequalities felt in society following the success of the first wave feminists. Legal rights for women had increased with the vote and property rights, but now was the time for the next generation of feminists to fight for the freedom of female autonomy. Her pithy formulation, "one is not born, but rather becomes woman," has become foundational in understanding gender identity. The woman became a subjective construct rather than an objective reality. The Second Sex begins by asking the basic yet fundamental question, what is a woman? In answering, de Beauvoir rejects two prevailing philosophical views, which she terms essentialism and nominalism. The essentialists promote the view that women have a female nature or essence which precedes their existence. In other words, womanhood is essential to a woman's nature, and de Beauvoir depicts this view with the term eternal feminine. One reason why she rejects this view is because she believes it inherently means that woman becomes the other. For example, she quotes Aristotle, who says, "The female is a female by virtue of a certain lack of qualities, and we should regard woman's nature as suffering from natural defectiveness." And Thomas Aquinas, who describes women as an incomplete man or an incidental being. And ultimately, de Beauvoir depicts the creation of woman in Genesis, where Eve appears as if drawn from Adam's supernumerary bone. Therefore, for de Beauvoir, it was clear that the essentialist view held that to be human is to be male, and by consequence, to be woman is to be defined in relation to and by the male. Thus, the male is the subject and the female is the other, and she is not an autonomous being. The opposing view of the nominalists holds that there is no such thing as essence before existence. A woman is therefore born a female body who is free to embrace and take an active role in femininity, or not. For de Beauvoir, this simplistic essentialist view of freedom represented by nominalism falls short. She states, "The truth is that anyone can clearly see that humanity is split into two categories. What is certain is for the moment they exist in a strikingly obvious way." Even though de Beauvoir rejects essentialism, she doesn't feel able to completely accept nominalism. For at least in the present time, there is something that inherently differentiates men and women beyond the choices they make. Therefore, for de Beauvoir, to be a woman is to be essentially restricted at that present time. Societal structures like history, the economy, culture, and education illustrate that freedom to make choices is not symmetrical. Women, she argues, are socially conditioned into femininity, limiting their freedom and agency. De Beauvoir writes, "So not every female human being is necessarily a woman. She must take part in this mysterious and endangered reality known as femininity." So the ideal of pure freedom posited by nominalism is not feasible in a world where women must navigate these social constraints. De Beauvoir weaves through the second sex a parallel between the asymmetry of freedom between male and female with that of transcendence and immanence. And this, she declares, is the key to the whole mystery. Females are biologically destined to repeat life through pregnancy, childbirth, and child-rearing, locking her into immanence, whereas males can transcend life, that is, he spills over the present and opens up the future. De Beauvoir depicts a reality where the female is stuck in the immanent, which is a creation by sovereign male transcendence. This, for her, is the ultimate obstacle that women face and why women have no autonomy. For de Beauvoir, limitless freedom is the goal, and this can only be achieved if females are autonomous, just like males. In de Beauvoir's time, this aspiration to female transcendence seemed plausible due to advances in technology. However, 75 years later, many feminists are more ready than de Beauvoir was to recognize that there are innate biological differences between men and women. For example, feminist philosopher Louise Perry argues in her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, that de Beauvoir's rejection of essentialism simply isn't scientifically true. She states that when the promises of limitless freedom inevitably come up against the hard limits imposed by biology, the ideology instructs women to chip away at those limits through the use of money, technology, and the bodies of poorer people. Perry calls on society to recognize and take seriously the inherent differences between men and women. For example, physical strength and speed, the emotional consequences of casual sex, and the contribution and cost of creating a child. The denial of these hard facts, she argues, enables powerful men to win and vulnerable women to lose. In sum, Perry, along with others such as Mary Harrington and Ivan Illich, would argue that society has effortlessly transitioned from one form of female oppression to another. But this one is under the pretense of liberation. Although this is a fair criticism of de Beauvoir's work, it should be noted that they are rooted in nature. They operate on a horizontal plane. And this makes it difficult to challenge de Beauvoir's main observation that men transcend and women repeat. In the power struggle between the genders, the objections raised by Perry et al. Do seem to suggest that women are in fact trapped by their biology. And this is where the Thomistic view of beauty can help to reconstruct the meaning of gender and free women to comprehend and embrace femininity. So in contrast to the prevailing modern view, for Aquinas, a thing is not beautiful because it brings pleasure. Rather, a thing brings pleasure because it is already true, good, and beautiful. Although he never explicitly calls beauty a transcendental, Aquinas' comments on beauty strongly suggest that he thinks of beauty in transcendental terms, along with truth and goodness. In the classical philosophical tradition, transcendentals are properties of being that do not add or take away from it, but are present in everything that exists. They are like a variety of visual aspects through which being can be viewed and understood. They differ from one another logically, but each transcendental remains the whole of being and it is in this sense that they are deemed convertible into one another. For example, meditating on beauty quickly involves consideration of truth and goodness, since they describe the same thing, being. These transcendental properties are present in everything that exists, but most perfectly in God, who is the uncreated being. Aquinas, in his commentary on the divine names, shows how beautiful things relate to God, who is beauty itself. For Aquinas, the beauty which we find in all things is a participation in, rather than a mere reflection of, a beauty which is identified with the first good, and therefore with being. Thus God, who is beauty, is the creator. Because everything that exists is born from him, it is therefore also born from beauty. Beauty is an inherent part of our being because it is inherently and perfectly part of God's being. It is all-encompassing and lifts the creature beyond itself because they are participating in something divine. Aquinas' objective view of beauty comes into focus when we look at the three formal characteristics of beauty. These he identifies as 1, integrity or perfection, 2, proportion or harmony, and 3, brightness or clarity. Integrity is concerned with a thing being what it is supposed to be in its own nature, and a failure to achieve this is deemed a defect or incomplete and therefore ugly. Harmony is to do with the order among parts, that is, how the parts relate to each other and are compatible with each other to become a united whole. And clarity is the intelligibility or radiance that a thing communicates to the world, which prompts contemplation and in turn produces pleasure. These three criteria mean that an object must be created, formed, and communicative to be judged whole and beautiful. Thus, beauty is perceived as something objective and is to do with the formal aspect of things. For Aquinas, as a creature senses beauty in the form of things and is led to comprehend and contemplate it, so they are invited to transcend the material reality and enter a spiritual reality, and there experience an absolute reality, a likeness of perfect being. Understanding real beauty affects the whole man. It transforms the heart, the desires, and the mind. It awakens humanity to the deepest reality of what it means to be a human being. We have already mentioned that second wave feminism has been subject to several significant critiques from philosophers like Perry, Harrington, and Illich. However, we noted that the critics themselves are operating in the same horizontal or natural framework, leaving de Beauvoir's fundamental challenge unresolved. In this concluding section, it will be argued that the recovery of the Thomistic view of beauty as a transcendental will provide a more existentially satisfying answer to de Beauvoir's observation about the differential transcendence of the male relative to the female. This recovery will promote the transcendence of gender itself and highlight that innate gender differences are not just a horizontal power struggle, but a representation of beauty. When individual desire is perceived to be the origin of beauty, beauty ceases to be objectively present in the world. However, when there is a recognition that beauty is a transcendental and not solely pleasure-inducing, there is also recognition that the world is beautified. In the beautified world, every being will exist according to their nature. They will exist harmoniously, equally, and communally, and in so doing, communicate the image of God. When creation around us is recognized to be proclaiming the Creator's eternal power and divine nature, it causes an individual to see afresh that they are part of something much larger than themselves, something supernatural. When human beings live in a beautified world, it changes how they operate within it. Outlined below are two ways the Thomistic view of beauty brings a reformation of womanhood. First, gender transcends. In the creation account, Adam was formed from the earth as the pinnacle of God's creation. However, there was a disharmony because Adam lacked. He named the animals formed from the earth in search of someone like him, but there was none found that were suitable. God then created Eve from Adam's rib, and she was declared his suitable helper. Following the creation of Eve, God declared his whole creation very good. Adam no longer lacked. Adam and Eve became one flesh. Therefore, from creation, male and female together were created to harmoniously display the image of God. Sexual difference should be seen as beautiful and so transcendent. Second, women specifically transcend in beauty. There are innate differences between males and females. However, these do not translate into differences in value. Just as there are different transcendentals providing a variety of, as it were, visual aspects to expose being, so it is for gender. Maleness and femaleness offer humanity distinct views of God. There is an essential asymmetry within gender that is anchored in supernatural reality. It will not be overcome by any technology. This difference is a gift to show us true beauty. There's not time to discuss this here, but in the Genesis account, we see that men are orientated toward a sphere of power, and females are orientated toward a sphere of beauty. The Thomistic view of beauty allows both to transcend. This asymmetry is complementary and non-competitive, and it enables the flourishing of creation. De Beauvoir's analysis does not allow for female transcendence, only masculine power transcends. The result of this is a masculinization of women to compete in the sphere of power. This breaks Aquinas' 3 criteria for beauty as outlined previously. Since a woman is not being what she is supposed to be in her own nature, the harmonious relationship between man and woman is replaced with a competitive resistant one, and finally, the significance and intelligibility of the feminine sphere is severely compromised. In Thomistic language, this would be a deformation and considered ugly. The evidence of this is plain to see as under the influence of second-wave feminism, a woman is forced to straddle and succeed across both spheres, and she is rarely flourishing. Operating on a purely horizontal level means that there will be competition for horizontal transcendence, as de Beauvoir suggests. Whereas in recognizing the plurality of transcendental qualities of being, there can be a male-orientated transcendental quality of being and a female-orientated transcendence. There's a danger that in acknowledging there are different spheres within which males and females tend to operate, that a list of roles gets produced. But beauty does not call for an efficiency movement where each individual commits to performing a particular role. Rather, beauty calls humanity to acknowledge and celebrate the innate differences between males and females, and in recognizing that they will naturally orientate themselves in their relative spheres. These spheres harmoniously work together, communicating something of the greater reality beyond creation. What the Thomistic view of beauty teaches is that this world is a beautified world. Beauty is at home in this world, and gendered humanity is an important part of this supernatural reality. Yet individuals need domesticated and educated to contemplate the beauty of gender correctly. A reappreciation of beauty as a transcendental facilitates a reappreciation of gender, and specifically femininity as a created reality. Thank you.